Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. We're continuing on by looking at Taoism this week. So, just like we've been doing for the rest of this class, today we're going to be looking at some of the passages within the primary text of this Asian philosophy. More specifically, we're going to look at select passages in chapters 1 through 50 of the Tao Te Ching, which is not a very long book at all. You can probably get through the whole thing rather quickly. I'm not going to go through every passage, and some of the passages that I actually did end up selecting, we're only going to look at snippets of them because I think some of these passages are saying multiple things, and I don't exactly have the time or the space to go through all of what is implied for all of these passages. So we're just going to look at a few of them here. But I hope you find it interesting, enlightening, and again, I would encourage you all to do the reading yourself and see if you can come to some other interpretations or some other views about what you think Lao Tzu is implying or saying with these passages. Let's go ahead and start right at the beginning with chapter 1. It says, and this is the first passage in the book, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness, darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. So this passage is indeed a little bit mysterious, mystical, cryptic, esoteric, even. Um, but basically, what I think this passage is trying to express, the main idea, is what exactly we're talking about with the term or the concept Tao. Remember last lecture, we ended up saying that the words and the concepts we use to describe reality are not the same things as reality itself. And that's what this passage is kind of saying here. Uh, we use this word Tao to refer to the movement of or the operations of the universe, the flow of the universe. But the Tao that Taoism is based off of, that the Taoist is trying to get in touch with, is not something that can be defined or categorized. Um, any signification that we try to use as a stand-in for the Tao is going to fall short of actually um, representing it fully. Another idea in this passage is that distinctions between things, the fact that we see different things, um, that arises from naming and from mental activity, from mental processes. This fortune and this cassette player are ultimately both participating in the Tao, according to Taoism. So the Tao is the ultimate reality behind all of the appearances, behind all of the names and the distinctions that we see. But really, everything is ultimately one. Everything is a part of the Tao and is participating in the Tao. So I think those are some of the main ideas being expressed here. This coffee mug is part of the Tao. This water bottle is part of the Tao. You and I are part of the Tao. So, ultimately, what that implies is we should try to live in accordance with it instead of uh, being drowned in all of the distinctions that uh, we make up and use during our daily lives. Chapter 2 says, when people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. Being and not being create each other. Difficult and easy support each other. Long and short define each other. High and low depend on each other. Before and after follow each other. So here we see another central idea within Taoism, which is based on this concept of yin and yang, polarity. The idea being that the oppositional elements that we tend to see in the universe are actually part of the same underlying thing, the Tao. And all of the distinctions that we see around us, uh, those distinctions inform and are interconnected with every other thing and event that we see in reality. So, all things, including you, the grass, the trees, bowling balls, paintings, everything that exists is interconnected and interdependent on everything else that exists. And in a fundamental way, all of these things depend on the Tao for their existence. So, understanding this, if we recognize that everything exists in polarity, that everything is part of the same underlying dynamic process, we can use that to great effect if we understand how those things work, if we understand what the relationships are between these things. Not too complex, but again, it is kind of written in an esoteric, cryptic way that would not be obvious if we didn't already have some training in Eastern philosophy. Because this way of thinking is very different from how we do things in the United States, for example. Passage 3, or chapter 3, says, if you overesteem great men, people become powerless. If you overvalue possessions, people begin to steal. The master leads by emptying people's minds and filling their cores, by weakening their ambition and toughening their resolve. He helps people lose everything they know, everything they desire, and creates confusion in those who think that they know. Practice not doing, and everything will fall into place. So, this passage, I think, is describing the character of the person who really understands and follows Taoism, lives in accordance with the Tao, and what that looks like. Again, like Buddhism, Taoism is going to encourage us to engage in detachment from the projects, from the goals, from wanting people to like us, detaching ourselves from the things of this world, right? Learning to accept what is and going with the flow. Part of what this involves is emptying ourselves of our blinding attachments and presuppositions. Whenever we see a phenomenon out there in the world, whenever we're trying to understand the way the world works, we bring a certain interpretive schema or a certain model to bear on the stuff that we experience. And we make sense of that experience through the model that we have in our heads, through our concepts, through our words, through our stories. Well, these presuppositions, these models, can blind us to what is actually going on. They can distort what is actually happening, misrepresent to us what's actually happening. And so, if we attach ourselves to our views of the world, the values that we were conditioned into, the models that we have of how the world works in our heads, if we cling to these things, that can prevent us from understanding the world in a more holistic sense, understanding our experience in a more holistic way. What we should be trying to do is getting back in touch with reality instead of just trying to understand and interact with reality through the words and concepts and models that we already have. What we see in Taoism is kind of an implication that we should be closed minded, or open minded, rather, excuse me, to a certain extent. If we just latch on to particular models, words, concepts, desires, this is going to prevent us from achieving a fuller understanding of what's going on, and it's going to prevent us from living uh, a flourishing life at the end of the day. So we want to be open minded so that we are not attached to all of this stuff. If we want to live a flourishing life, We need to kind of forget, in some sense, what we were taught, uh, being conditioned into this Western worldview that um, is very different from how Taoism thinks and operates. Chapter 7 states, the Tao is infinite, eternal. Why is it eternal? It was never born, thus it can never die. Why is it infinite? It has no desires for itself, thus it is present for all beings. The master stays behind. That is why she is ahead. She is detached from all things. That is why she is one with them. Because she has let go of herself, she is perfectly fulfilled. So here we have another central idea within Taoist metaphysics. The idea being that this thing that we call the Tao, that is behind all things, that is producing all things, that is moving all things and making things evolve and sustaining them. This is not something that we can really categorize or completely understand or wrap our minds around. It has no beginning or end. It doesn't have any limits, as far as we can tell. However, even though it is mysterious to us, that doesn't mean that we can't live in congruence with it. This is what Taoism is pushing us to do at the end of the day. It wants us to live in congruence with the Tao because, according to Taoism, that is how the harmony of the universe is going to be established. This is what it means to truly live, to live in the present, to live without all of these attachments and blinding presuppositions. Living in accordance with this mysterious, infinite energy in the universe that makes up the universe. Passage 8, or chapter 8, says, the supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. In dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everybody will respect you. So here again, we see what it means to live in accordance with the Tao as being compared to another image from nature, this time being water. When water is flowing and it comes up against a rock, it doesn't like stay in the same place and try to push the rock forward, right? It doesn't try to impose its will on the rock. What does water do? It flows around the rock, right? It just continues on forward, following the flow of the current rather than trying to control or grasp the situation that it's in, right? Like Bruce Lee says, if we want to be a Taoist, we need to move like water. We need to go with the flow, roll with the punches, instead of being sturdy and stubborn and trying to force everything to be the way that we want it to be. If we follow our own inner nature, which again is a part of the Tao, that is going to be our best path forward. Rather than trying to go against our nature, trying to control other people. Rather, again, Taoism is trying to encourage us to live according to the desires and the instincts that bubble up for us. If you're tired, you go to sleep. If you're hungry, you eat. If you want to go outside, you step outside. Instead of endlessly trying to plan and control everything, if we just followed our own nature, as water does water stuff, as cats do cat things, as turtles do turtle things, we'd be a lot better off. Chapter 9 says, fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. The only path to serenity. Here again, we see a warning about making our happiness conditioned on what's going on outside of us, on people's opinions of us, on external affairs. Instead, what Taoism is trying to encourage us to do and to realize is that peace, security, happiness, this stuff comes from within. Okay? And it doesn't come from trying to hoard things or grasp things, but from letting things go. This generally is how the Tao operates. The Tao does not grasp and hold on to things. Rather, it just lets things go, produces things, and then it lets things go, right? If we chase after external things, if we attach ourselves to external affairs, material things, other people's approval, this stuff is not going to lead us to serenity. Instead, if we can teach ourselves not to care about that crap, to find independence and fulfillment in our own state of affairs, in our own spiritual and mental place, we're going to be a lot better off. Oftentimes, what we end up seeing is that people who obsessively chase happiness end up not acquiring it. Chapter 12 states, colors blind the eye, sounds deafen the ear, flavors numb the taste, thoughts weaken the mind, desires wither the heart. The master observes the world but trusts his inner vision. He allows things to come and go. His heart is open as the sky. So I think there are a few things that are being expressed here. But one of them is that desire, giving into desire, forming expectations, chasing sensual pleasures like food, drink, sex, drugs, rock and roll, that stuff is not going to allow you to flourish. We've talked about this before, I believe, in relation to Buddhism, where living a hedonistic lifestyle, where one is constantly trying to satisfy their desires and receive pleasure, that's a never-ending path, right? You just get trapped in this cycle of satisfying your desire, then you become unsatisfied again, and then you have to do something again, and then you become unsatisfied again. Rather, if we could somehow eliminate our desires, like Buddhism says, eliminate our attachments, not chase after stimulation all the time, not chase after material things, not expect good things to happen to us, not expecting everything to be great, we'd be happier. We'd be more peaceful. We'd probably get along a lot better with others. The master, the passage says, observes the world but trusts his inner vision. What is this inner vision? It's that intuitive understanding of how the world works if the person is in congruence with the Tao. That is why he allows things to come and go. That is why his heart is open as the sky. He's happy. He's peaceful. He's content. Chasing after pleasure, forming these unnecessary expectations are only going to bring us heartache. Chapter 13 says, and this is just a snippet, Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. When we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? See the world as yourself. Have faith in the way things are. Love the world as yourself. Then you can care for all things. Here, I think we have another comment on Taoist metaphysics. What are you fundamentally? You're a part of all this, right? You're a part of the Tao, which underlies everything. If you get caught up in equivocating yourself to some social role or some social positionality or some contingent aspect of your personality or your being, that is going to preclude you from being happy. Really, you are connected to all of this stuff. How all of this stuff turns out and how your life turns out are connected, right? So if you could escape the trappings of your own ego, if you could dissolve this idea that you are the same as your job, or you are the same as your thoughts, or you are the same as what the existentialists would call your facticity. If you could dissolve these beliefs, you'd be a lot happier. Egoism, focusing on the self, focusing on desire, focusing on what I want, what's going to make me happy, that stuff is going to just lead you down a road of heartache and insecurity. Okay? We should not seek after the satisfactions of our selfish desires. We should seek after transforming ourselves so that we can learn to accept and find happiness in all states of affairs. This is one of the central teachings of Taoism. Chapter 15 states, "The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There is no way to describe it. All we can describe is their appearance. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment. Not seeking, not expecting. She is present and welcome and can welcome all things." Again, we should not consciously or intentionally try to seek our own fulfillment or seek the satisfaction of our own desires. Trying to intentionally follow Taoism is going to necessarily lead us to failure. Again, by trying to be cool, you're not going to be cool, right? Coolness is something that just flows out of a person, exudes from them, right? Likewise, Taoism, practicing Taoism is something that you just do naturally. It cannot be sought. It cannot be, it's not a discipline like martial arts is a discipline, okay? When we look at the Taoist and Zen masters who have been able to achieve happiness and fulfillment in their life on account of detaching themselves from the things of this world and learning to accept the way that the world is, it becomes obvious that how they live cannot be taught. I cannot transmit that information from my brain to your brain. The truth of how to live a flourishing life, how to live in accordance with the Tao, is something that just needs to naturally and intuitively be realized and acted out in the world. It's not something that you can consciously practice and master. Chapter 16 states, and this again is a snippet, "If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified, as a king. One of the things that I think this passage is trying to express is once you come to an understanding of who or what you are, that is a part of the Tao that underlies all things, that sustains and moves all things, this leads you to an understanding, an intuitive understanding about how you ought to act, how you ought to treat yourself and other people. Not only is Taoism the path to happiness, we might say, but it is also the path to moral action and treating others respectfully and lovingly, according to the Taoists. Once you accept people for who they are, once you don't try to force them to act a certain way, that allows you to cultivate some empathy and it allows you to treat them well. That's what I think is part of what's being implied here. You become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind hearted as a grandmother, and dignified as a king, as somebody who has found inner peace and security that outweighs and outlasts the peace and security brought about by wealth, fame, or social political power. Chapter 17 states, when the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. Next best is, at best is a leader who is loved. Next, one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. The master doesn't talk, he acts. When his work is done, the people say, amazing, we did it all by ourselves. So, this passage is a little bit mysterious, but I think what we're getting here is an idea that's similar to what we saw in Confucianism, which is about what proper rule looks like. Remember, this philosophy of life was being formulated around the same time that Confucianism was, which was on the cusp of this warring states period, in which there was a lot of social and political chaos, insecurity, violence, and even death. How should one rule in such circumstances? What does proper rule look like from a king or an emperor? Well, according to Taoism, the best ruler is one who is not known very well by his subjects, is one who transforms, in some sense, the characters of his people so that they naturally act well, so that they naturally cooperate and come together. If you want to be a good ruler, according to Taoism, you shouldn't try to force people to think or act in a certain way. In matters of government and social life, non authoritarianism is the way, allowing people to act according to their natural inclinations, embodying patience, embodying love, doing what is best for the people. That is what is going to allow for good rule instead of trying to put into play these top down control mechanisms that cause people to rebel, that cause people to be unhappy. Chapter 20 states, other people have what they need. I alone possess nothing. I alone drift about like someone without a home. I am like an idiot, my mind is so empty. Other people are bright. I alone am dark. Other people are sharp. I alone am dull. Other people have a purpose. I alone don't know. I drift like a wave on the ocean. I blow as aimless as the wind. I am different from ordinary people. I drink from the Great Mother's breasts. Here, at the very end, this image is supposed to represent being in congruence with the Tao, right? That is what is meant by Great Mother. What I have here on the left-hand side of the slide is a picture, a painting of a hermit, somebody who has kind of forsaken society and gone out on their own and struck out on their own path. This is kind of what Taoism is encouraging us to do, right? People in society nowadays, they think they know everything. They think they understand reality. They have a purpose. They have a plan. They have all these things in motion that they're trying to control. The Taoists are saying, if you want to live a flourishing and moral life, that's not the way to go about it. Okay? Following society is not going to allow you to achieve fulfillment. And this was an idea that we saw in Buddhism as well. The path to flourishing is not popular, nor does it follow society's ways. Instead, it involves shunning a lot of the things that society cares about and prioritizes, like wealth, power, and material possessions. Instead, it encourages, again, acceptance of the way things are, some sort of reconciliation with reality rather than trying to mold it as we see fit, which is the central message of the story of Lucifer in the Bible. Somebody who tried to impose his will on the world and paid for it. Chapter 29 states, "Do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. If you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you'll lose it. The master sees things as they are, without trying to control them. She lets them go their own way and resides at the center of the circle." Here we see an idea that is actually the opposite of Christianity and some other Western religions, which says that there is something wrong with humans and that there is something wrong with the world. We see this also within Buddhism, insofar as it says our lives are inherently filled with suffering, and the world is participating in this bad cycle that we need to get out of. Instead, Taoism is going to say, no, actually, there's nothing objectively bad or wrong about the world. Okay, the world is beautiful. The world is sacred. Humans are beautiful. Humans are sacred. Nothing needs to be fixed or saved. Instead, the problems that we see uh, are produced by us trying to make things go the way that they're not naturally supposed to go. And so, the world cannot be improved because it is already perfect and sacred due to its participation in the Tao. All is sacred. Things don't need to be fixed or saved. Chapter 31 says, "Weapons are the tools of violence. All decent men detest them. Weapons are the tools of fear. A decent man will avoid them except in the direst necessity, and, if compelled, will use them only with the utmost restraint. Peace is his highest value. If the peace has been shattered, how can he be content? His enemies are not demons, but human beings like himself. He doesn't wish them personal harm, nor does he rejoice in victory." What we see here is a warning against trying to control and mold the world as we see fit, against the natures of things, right? The true Taoist has no enemies or plans that need to be actualized. They're living in the moment, they're going with the flow. This does not mean, however, that the Taoist does not act. What proper action looks like is Wu Wei. Following the path of least resistance, expending energy only when you have to, acting in an intelligent way rather than unintelligently going against the grain and trying to battle against the forces of the universe. One popular manifestation of this idea that we can see in popular culture is within the anime Vinland Saga. Thorfinn, our protagonist, I believe that is his name, somebody who is trained in battle since a young age, who kills a lot of people, ends up realizing the truth of his father's words, who, like him, was somebody who was a warrior, but retired from battle later in his life, from combat, saying instead that he has no enemies. His goal is to no longer try to force the world to be a certain way through violence, but is to live in accordance with it. This is an idea that Thorfinn also comes to realize. And here we have an image of him coming to this conclusion, realizing the truth, the wisdom behind his father's words. I believe this is taken from the manga. So yeah, the Taoist may fight if it's absolutely necessary, but again, they're going to do what their nature compels them to do. They're not going to go out of their way to get things done. Moving on to chapter 32, a snippet of it says, if powerful men and women could remain centered in the Tao, all things would be in harmony. The world would become a paradise. All people would be at peace, and the law would be written in their hearts. When you have names and forms, know that they are provisional. When you have institutions, know where their functions should end. Knowing when to stop, you can avoid any danger. So here we see an idea about how paradise, in some sense, can be achieved if everything is allowed to go its own way. If things are allowed to do what they are meant to do. Ultimately, the disorder that we see in reality, most, if not all of it, is due to human meddling, forcing, trying to mold the world to be something it's not, to do something it's not. Perhaps no greater warning exists against forcing and meddling than the horrors of the 20th century, where we saw the rise of um, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, according to Hannah Arendt, who talks about the rise of various communistic regimes in Asia, in Russia, that ended up killing tens of millions of people. We might say this is what happens when you try to force the world to be a certain way. There's conflict. People die. It's not good. So I think contemporary Taoists would look at historical events like that, trying to force the world to follow a certain social political paradigm and say, this is what happens when you try to do that. Harmony will only be established if things are allowed to go their own way. If we do not meddle in everything, if we do not try to force and control everything. Chapter 33 says, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. So here we have another insistence on getting your internal landscape understood and properly ordered first, rather than looking to external stuff. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever. There's something a little bit mysterious going on with the end of this passage. But what I think is being evoked here is something that we actually see some Christian mystics talk about with regards to living in the present and thereby participating in eternity. One thing that the Christian mystics talk about is that the present moment, is one of the only things, maybe the only thing in the universe that is eternal. There will always be a present, right? And so if you live in the present, if you don't project your mind forward or backward constantly, if you're not worrying about the future, if you're not regretting the past, if you're living in the present, the mystics say that you are in some sense participating in eternity. And you'll know what this is like if you've ever really gotten into a game, a sports game, or a video game, or an activity in which the time just flew by, right? It was as if time did not exist. This experience, I think, is what is kind of meant by enduring forever. And what this involves is not shunning death, but actually embracing it, not worrying about your death, not trying to plan for it, not trying to stave it off, but welcoming it when it comes. We should not cling to material things. We shouldn't even cling to our own lives. Again, the stronger we try to grasp and control this stuff, the more it is going to escape our grasp, like trying to clutch water. Chapter 35 says, "She who is centered in the Tao can go where she wishes without danger. She perceives the universal harmony, even amid great pain, because she has found peace in her heart." This might be a little bit controversial, but what I think this passage is saying is that one who lives in accordance with the Tao, being centered in the Tao, this is often referred in the text as being in the center of the circle, it protects one from both physical and psychological hardship. If you intelligently understand, if you intuitively understand the way that the world works, how people think, what people are like, what they are driven by, what they do, you're naturally going to know how to avoid danger, how to avoid pain, what situations you should avoid, which situations you should embrace, right? It's strange because the way that the Taoists talk about living is that one who lives in accordance with the Tao lives intelligently. They live with an intuitive understanding about how things work, but they're not thinking about that, right? They're not analyzing it. They're not trying to figure it out. It's just something that they intuitively know. And this is something that comes from experience in various situations throughout your life. Um, Slowly but surely, as you live, you will come to understand and have a more holistic intuition about the way the world works. Once that becomes second nature, once you learn to trust yourself and your intuitions, that will lead you into peace and security and away from danger, both physical and psychological. And so I think that's what this passage is getting at. Chapter 36 says, "If you want to shrink something, you must first allow it to expand. If you want to get rid of something, you must first allow it to flourish. If you want to take something, you must first allow it to be given. This is called the subtle perception of the way things are." So here we have another expression of how the Tao works in a very mysterious way. We could say that history and the universe kind of operates according to a principle of rise and fall, right? Maybe even perhaps like a pendulum. The pendulum is going to swing one way and things are going to be one way, and then it's naturally going to swing back and then things are going to be a different way, right? In a way that is oppositional to what was first happening. This seems to be kind of how the world operates, right? We go through phases where society is more free and then it's less free. More free, less free. People are unhappy, then people are happy. Unhappy, happy. People are weak, and then people, as a result of the times, are made strong. Strong people create easy times, which then makes people weak, and then people have to become strong again to deal with that. In a strange way, in a non-intuitive way, at first glance, it seems like the universe operates according to very strange principles. Right? If you want to shrink something, you must first allow it to expand. If you want to get rid of something, you must first allow it to flourish. I think what these passages are expressing a little bit is that, again, going against the grain, trying to force something, ain't going to work. Let's take the Roman Empire as an example. Somebody who wanted to dissolve the Roman Empire might try to do so through force. This happened a lot through history, right? People tried to fight against Alexander the Great and other Roman emperors. It didn't work, right? They got squashed. What ended up happening? Well, the Roman Empire ended up dissolving because it got too big, right? It expanded too much. It wasn't able to hold all of this territory. It wasn't able to rule the people properly. And then it kind of decayed from within, and its borders started being threatened, and it shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, right? If people had just played the waiting game, accepted the domination of the Roman Empire, and not tried to force it to be smaller, its enemies, let's say, if they just would have waited, again, it was going to shrink on its own time. I think this might be a good example of how the world works, at least according to this principle that is stated in chapter 36. Trying to force things ain't going to work. Eventually, things will change. They will swing back the other way if you give it time. Chapter 38 says, "The master doesn't try to be powerful, thus he is truly powerful. The ordinary man keeps reaching for power, thus he never has enough. The master does nothing, yet he leaves nothing undone. The ordinary man is always doing things, yet many more are left to be done. The kind man does something, yet something remains undone. The just man does something and leaves many things to be done. The moral man does something, and when no one responds, he rolls up his sleeves and uses force." Again, I think this passage is talking about how reaching for power, trying to grasp and control everything, is going to backfire on us. Okay? I think you've heard the famous phrase before, man's reach exceeds his grasp. I think there's some truth to this. And I think what this tells us is that when we constantly reach for things, when we're constantly trying to do things, when we're trying to control reality, we end up harming ourselves and others. The master doesn't try to be powerful, thus he is truly powerful. Think about somebody who doesn't try to care about what other people think. Somebody who doesn't give a shit about what other people think. Who's living their own life, who has their own style, who does what they want to do. Can they be harmed by the words of others? Can they be harmed by what other people think of them? No, they've already detached themselves from all that crap. That's kind of what's being invoked here, right? The ordinary man keeps reaching for power and never has enough. The master does nothing, yet he leaves nothing undone. In a paradoxical way, letting go of reality lets you authentically and truly live in a way that allows you to regain it all and more. It's weird, I know, but there's some wisdom to it. Chapter 39 states, "In harmony with the Tao, the sky is clear and spacious. The earth is solid and full. All creatures flourish together, content with the way they are, endlessly repeating themselves, endlessly renewed. When man interferes with the Tao, the sky becomes filthy, the earth becomes depleted, the equilibrium crumbles, creatures become extinct." Again, trying to control the environment, using the environment just for our economic ends up producing chaos and instability in various ecosystems, right? Think about what we are doing across the globe by treating the environment in an economical way. using it for our own ends, not really understanding how ecosystems work, but going in there, killing animals, taking resources. That's having a bad effect on the earth, right? And it's having a bad effect on these animals. Instead, if we just allowed everything to go its own way, what's going to happen in the forest? If the deer population gets too big, then the wolf population is going to increase to and bring the deer population down. Once the deer population is down and the wolf population is up, there's not enough food for the wolves, right? So then the wolf population is going to die off. As that happens, because there's not as many wolves hunting the deer population is going to go back up, right? And an equilibrium is kind of established between predator and prey in ecosystems, for example. These are known as predator-prey models. All of that stuff works itself out. It's when we meddle, it's when we move around, it's when we introduce new elements like invasive species that the system falls apart, that the ecosystem doesn't work anymore. Humility and acceptance of the world are central to achieving the good life, according to Taoism. Without these, by meddling in all this stuff that we don't really understand, that we shouldn't be meddling it with, that's going to cause bad stuff to happen. Ultimately, that's kind of the cause of the Warring States period, right? People reaching for power, meddling, not being content with what they have. Chapter 40 says, return is the movement of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. All things are born of being. Being is born of non-being. This is a really strange passage, right? Its message is not obvious. It's kind of mystical, it's kind of deep, but it's also using very simplistic language. So, what gives here? Well, for lack of my own understanding, perhaps, although I do think this is expressing some sort of truth about the Tao, I think the sense that it produces in us is that there are still fundamental questions about the nature of reality, about the nature of the Tao, that remain a mystery to us, and that cannot be expressed using words, concepts, or social constructions, right? We're never going to completely understand intellectually how the Tao works, though we may live in accordance with it. We're never going to completely understand everything there is to know about the universe, how it all works, how it all fits together. But we know how to live in accordance with it so that we're successful, so that our families are happy, so that we can get stuff done. I think, in some sense, what this passage instills in me is a humility with respect to the way things are and how everything fits together. There are some things we're just not going to be able to figure out, some questions we're not going to be able to answer. I think it would be wise to accept and embrace the mystery rather than trying to dissolve it in all that we do. A snippet of chapter 44 says the following. If you look to others for fulfillment, you will never truly be fulfilled. If your happiness depends on money, you will never be happy with yourself. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. Again, I think the central idea being echoed here is this warning against externalizing our happiness or our fulfillment, our security, and our peace. If we want to achieve a flourishing life, if we want to be happy, if we want to become strong and independent and wise and loving and knowing, we need to do work on ourselves, right? We need to change how we see reality. We need to change our relationship with ourselves, with others, and with reality. Nobody is going to hand happiness and peace and security to you. This is something that you're going to have to cultivate yourself by working on your thoughts, by working on your speech and your actions. Externalizing the conditions for our own happiness and fulfillment, for our own security and peace, is always going to leave us feeling unhappy, stressed, chaotic, insecure. Once we realize that we can find peace and fulfillment and security in ourselves, in our thoughts, in our actions, in our own authentic, individual, natural way of being, we'll all be a lot better off. This is what Taoism is pushing us towards, I believe. Individual transformation, such that the individual comes to operate in accordance with the way the universe is flowing and working. Chapter 47 says, without opening your door, you can open your heart to the world. Without looking out your window, you can see the essence of the Tao. The more you know, the less you understand. This is something that I think would be worth meditating on in our contemporary lives, right? We always seek answers and justifications for things. We seek knowledge. We do experiments. We do all these things to try to know the way reality works. But again, those signs and categories and significations can actually get in the way of us truly living. And isn't that the point of what we're here to do? Is to live? Is to find peace and fulfillment? True wisdom can be blocked by our own desire to try to consciously understand it all. If we really want to get Taoism, if we want to live in accordance with it, it's not an activity of the conscious mind. It's something more basic and fundamental than that. What this idea reminds me of is a famous painting known as, I believe, The Treachery of Images. This is a picture of a pipe, and it says underneath the pipe, this is not a pipe. Seems contradictory, right? But the artist is actually spot on here. The image here of the pipe is not the pipe itself. Just as the word water bottle is not the water bottle itself, right? Or the concept of watch is not the watch itself, right? We can become lost, confused, and unhappy if we become caught up in all of these significations, in these words, in these categories. Instead, what Taoism is trying to push us towards is a simple way of living, not of endlessly thinking about things, not of grasping things. Hopefully that makes sense. Chapter 48 says, in the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action, Wu Wei. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It can't be gained by interfering. And here I think we have a great summary of what Taoism is, or at least what it involves. The Taoist path is one of shedding our attachments, in contrast to the conventional path, whether that is the path of science, the path of the path of the traditional Western person, which is one of collecting items, collecting thoughts, collecting knowledge, attaching ourselves to various things. This little cartoon on the left, I think, does a good job of expressing this. It says you need to let go. The sooner, the better. And we have a little girl holding on to a bomb that says the past. Yes, This is exactly what Taoism would encourage. You need to let go of things. Let go of your need to be loved by everyone. Let go of your desire to get good grades. Let go of your desire for power or fame or wealth. Let go of all of that stuff. Once you let go of that stuff, then you'll be able to live truly uh, and live a flourishing life. Trying to grasp and control all that stuff and seek after that stuff will only lead to heartache. Chapter 49 says, the master trusts people who are trustworthy. She also trusts people who aren't trustworthy. This is true trust. The master's mind is like space. People don't understand her. Yes, the Taoist path is one that people do not tend to understand. It's not something that people can wrap their minds around. What the heck is meant here by the master trusts people who are trustworthy and trusts people who aren't trustworthy? Why is this true trust? Well, I think there's a lot wrapped up in that word trust that might lead us astray. Again, if you are to practice Taoism, it involves engaging in action at the appropriate time. Remember, it's not laziness. It's not just sitting on the couch and eating Cheetos all day. It's acting at the appropriate time, leveraging the energies of the universe to your ends in some way. The master, the person who is following the Tao, who is in congruence with the Tao, it says they trust people who are trustworthy and they trust people who aren't trustworthy. Why is this true trust? It's true trust not because the master is placing their faith in what everybody says that they're going to do, but the master understands how people think and how people act. If you have somebody who is untrustworthy, if you trust that they're going to be untrustworthy, you can predict their actions and you know how they're going to act, right? If you know somebody is trustworthy and you trust that they will be trustworthy, you know how they are going to act. You know what they are going to think and say. So it has to do with knowing how the universe works. How do people think? How do people operate? Once you have an intuitive understanding of that stuff, then you are going to be able to live a flourishing life. We will be able to rest easy in the knowledge and trust that things are going to go according to their own natures. It's when you get caught up in your own head trying to figure everything out consciously that you might run into trouble. And finally, this is the last passage we'll look at. We have chapter 50. This is a picture on the left of a Taoist monk, I believe, in Beijing. The master gives himself up to whatever the moment brings. He knows that he is going to die, and he has nothing left to hold on to. No illusions in his mind, no resistances in his body. He doesn't think about his actions. They flow from the core of his being. He holds nothing back from life. Therefore, he is ready for death, as a man is ready for sleep after a good day's work. Again, to really practice Taoism, you need to be in congruence naturally with the Tao, effortlessly, not trying to consciously think, speak, or act in certain ways, but doing what bubbles up, what comes of your own nature. If you follow this, if you follow your own nature, you are not going to be filled with delusion and resistance that conscious thought brings about if you engage in it too intensely. I'm sure you've experienced that, right? Or you've thought too much about something or worried too much about something. In those instances, your own mind has become your enemy. Instead, let it all go. Do what comes naturally. Then, according to Taoism, you will be able to achieve a flourishing life. Okay. So, just before we end here, I want to pose a few questions to you. Things I'd like you to meditate on during this week. Talk about this stuff with your family and your friends. Think about this stuff. See what they think. See what you think. First, do you agree with Taoism that your life would be much better if you relaxed and went with the flow? If you stopped trying to control things, grasp things, force things. Why or why not? Second, can you see how living in the present opens you up to a more authentic mode of life? Experiencing the present moment, really being there with your attention focused on it instead of trying to record the moment, right, with your phone. How annoying is that when you go to a concert and everybody just has their phone and they're recording it and they're looking at the screen? Are they really persisting in the experience, really soaking it all in, absorbing it, having fun? Or is their attention directed elsewhere? Finally, do you think learning how the universe works and trusting each thing to follow its own pattern or lead would be beneficial to you? Why or why not? Think about these questions. Think about how they relate to your life. I think Taoism has a lot of wisdom in it. I think it's a really cool Eastern philosophy. It has been my pleasure today to explore some of it with you. I hope you continue reading it, continue reflecting on it, and talking about this stuff. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Thank you, and I hope you all have a great week. See you next time.